you can automatically create a certificate using your chatbot. So we are going to use MMIO Connect here. By the way, MMIO Connect is powered by N8N or nodemation.io. So N8N.io is a workflow automation platform. So it is open source. And we integrated it with Marketing Master IO so you guys can do workflow automations for free. Um, we are going to use the workflow that I created earlier, and I'm going to show you the power of that workflow. So let me first demonstrate to you what we are going to achieve here, or the output that we are going to create. So let me first send a test message, and I'm going to show you what this flow does. So as I have said earlier, this flow would automatically create certificates. So this is the first message. Do you want to claim your certificate? I am going to click yes, please. And then it would prompt us to type the name. So example, I'm going to type my name. Okay, so that's the name of that's the name that I wanted to put on the certificate. So confirmation, will you put Colin Marcelino as the name of your certificate? So I'm gonna click yes, proceed. And after that, it will create the certificate for us. So now it is now the job of MMIO Connect to generate the certificate for us. And after that, we will receive the certificate. So this is the certificate. Congrats, you have successfully created your certificate. And if I click on the download URL here, we would be able to see the certificate generated for us. Okay, very good. So the certificate template is from Google Slides. You can basically create your template using PowerPoint and then upload the PowerPoint presentation on Google Slides. And then we are going to create a replaceable text so that the text gets replaced with the actual name of the subscriber. So let's test another one just to show you that the certificate can handle multiple names. Any names that we can put on the chatbot, the certificate will generate. So I'm going to click yes, please. And then we are going to confirm. So let's say Clark Kent. Okay, so that's the name that we want to put on the certificate. So Clark Kent, yes, let's proceed. And it will generate again the certificate for us. But this time, the name will be changed. We are going to be using the same template as well. The same, we're going to use the same Google slide. Okay, so this is the download link. It has been successfully generated for us. I'm gonna click on this and let's see what it gives us. All right, so as you can see, Clark Kent. It is now the certificate that was generated for us. So there are a lot of use cases for this one. Example, you want to automatically generate a ticket or a plane ticket or an invoice. Or if you have a template, yeah, like this one, a certification. So those are the few use cases that I can think of. Maybe you can think of another use case where there is a template and you can configure the template any way you want, and the user would be able to download this. So this one is can be created using the following requirements. You must have a Google Slide template. Then you must have access to Google Drive. And then we are going to use the MMIO chatbot and MMIO Connect powered by N8N.io. So how did I create this one? So I'm going to show you. First, this is the flow that I created. This is the first message. Hello, do you want to claim your certificate? And then a quick reply, yes, please. And then we are going to create a confirmation. And then we are going to create a user input here. So the user input would get the type data of the user. Example, the user types the name, John Doe. It will be saved on our custom variable, which is the certificate name. So that's the name of our custom variable. And then on this one, we are going to output the custom variable here, certificate name, and it will be replaced by the actual name of the user, the one that the user typed on the chatbot. So if the user confirms, we will check if the user indeed have inputted a value. So on the condition, we are going to check if the certificate name has value. So if the certificate name has value, we can now proceed with this message. Please wait. We are now creating your certificate for you. But if the user did not type or did not type anything or has no value here, then we are going to urge the user to type again. So example, sorry, first name, you did not enter the name for the certificate, and then the user will be redirected back to this message where the user is prompted to input the name again. Lastly here, we would be able to see that there is an HTTP request. So this HTTP request is connected to connect.marketingmaster.io. So this is MMIO Connect powered by N8N.io. So we are just sending this post request. So this is a webhook. And then MMIO Connect would replace the text on our Google Slide template. And then it will save the file on our Google Drive, and the output would be saved on another user input. I mean, on another custom variable. So the custom variable will be saved here on the certificate URL, and then this certificate URL will be the one that handles the URL that the user can click, and the user will be able to download that certificate. So now I have shown you the part of the MMIO chatbot. How about the part for the MMIO Connect? So let's go to MMIO Connect, go to Utilities. On your dashboard menu, left-hand side menu, go to Utilities and click MMIO Connect. And once we are inside the MMIO Connect, what I'm going to do to make our time faster is I'm just going to import the workflow that I created earlier on. So let's create a new workflow here. So by the way, MMIO Connect, this is powered by N8N.io. You can go to the documentation here, and you would be able to know more about N8N here. Just click about N8N, and then on the documentation, you'll be able to see that we are going to be redirected on the N8N documentation. So N8N is a very powerful platform. It is like Zapier. It is like Pabbly Connect, like Integromat. So I'm going to show you how this works. So let me just upload or import the workflow automation that I created earlier on. So I'm going to click import from file. And then I'm going to use that import file, which is this one, so that we can I can easily show you how this is created. Okay, so good. The trigger here is a webhook. Okay, we're going to use webhook as our trigger. This is the webhook URL. So the start, we can just pause this because our trigger will now be the webhook. Okay, so the webhook is connected to our chatbot, which is we can connect the webhook URL using the HTTP request of our chatbot. So let's first configure the HTTP request. Let's double-click the webhook. No, let me explain first to you what would happen here. So what would happen is the webhook will receive the data that we submitted here. On the body, we are going to submit the name that the user has typed, and then we are going to submit the user ID. Okay, so actually on our current workflow, the user ID is not required, but it's best practice to really provide the user ID here. So after sending the data or the name that the user has inputted on the or the user has typed on the chatbot, the webhook will be received by our automation workflow. So this is the webhook that will receive. And then let's test how this works. Let's copy the test URL, and on the webhook here, let's try it again. Okay, so let's replace the production webhook because this is the production webhook URL here. Let's test it again using the test URL here. So let's click execute the node. So after executing the node, we can now test this request here. So click test request, and then it will send a test request for us. So, okay, there might be a problem here. Okay, so the problem is we have not set our credentials just yet. So what we can do is we can pause it here. We can pause this one. So let's pause this, and let's just pause all of them for now. Okay, I'm gonna pause. No, let's just disconnect. Okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm just disconnect this. Okay, so the error would not appear, because what I'm about to do is we are going to test the execution again, and then try to send a test request. And if we go back to the workflow, one or more use credentials are not accessible. So disconnecting did not work. What we need is let's just configure the credentials that I used here. Let's configure the credentials. Okay, let's get this back running. Let's unpause all of them. Okay, so by the way, I think I haven't explained yet how this works. So the webhook URL again will receive the data, and then we will check if the webhook contains the name or the name variable have a value. So if the name variable have a value, we are going to replace the text on Google Slides. So the Google Slide template that I used is this one. Okay, so this is the Google template, the Google Slide template. And as you can see here, I created a text, the replace me text here. So this is the text that is going to be replaced with the actual name of the user. So let me get back to our automation workflow, and let's configure all of the credentials. So currently I don't have a credential here yet. What we need to do is we are going to set a new credential here. So create a new credential. So by the way, I am using, let me close this one. There are two types of credentials available here, or two types of authentication. The OAuth 2 authentication and the service account. What we are going to use here is the OAuth 2. And then at the credential, we are going to create the new one, and then click login with Google. So after you click login with Google, we are going to select which user we want to use, the one that owns the Google Slide. And if you see here that the app is not verified, don't worry about that, because we have not yet, the app or the app that I used here for Google is still being verified. Google team has not completely verified this yet. I have yet to continue the verification process. But once we verify with Google, once Google team inspects this, then the app would be verified. So don't worry if you see this. It's totally normal. What you can do here instead is click the advanced. You would be able to see the advanced link here. Click advanced, and then click go to Marketing Master IO. So just click here, and then after doing that, click continue, so that we can proceed with the authentication with our Google account. So after our Google account is connected, we can now enter the presentation ID. So where do we get the presentation ID? So let's go back to Google Slides. This is actually the presentation ID on the URL. We are going to copy this presentation ID, and then go back to Google, and then enter the presentation ID over here. Okay, so the replace text. For the replace text, actually what we need here is we can use the variable which can be created, or which can be taken from the name or the data that the let me just pause this for now. Okay, so I think I figured out why the webhook is checking the data for all of the nodes first. Since we have not configured the credentials for all our Google Slides and Google Drive, the webhook URL will produce an error, because here on the respond, when we can configure when our webhook responds. I have set the when the last node finishes. So what would happen here is if I click execute node, it will execute all of the nodes, including the nodes that that we have not configured the credentials yet. Example, the Google Drive node, the Google Slide node, all of those have not been configured yet. So Google will run, I mean the workflow automation would run to all of them and it will encounter an error. So what we need to do here is make the respond. We are going to respond immediately, meaning we are going to just, we are not going to run to the whole workflow automation. We will give back the response as we receive the webhook data. So that should solve the problem here. So we can now execute the node. And then let's send a test request again. And yeah, it worked. All right, I think it did not work. Let me check first. Well, after checking what was wrong, I guess this is not the solution. What we really need is to update all of the credentials here. So since I have already updated the credentials for our Google Slide, we can now update the credential for our Google Drive. Let me update the credential here. Create new. Sign in with Google. And as usual, I'm gonna use this profile. So again, do not be afraid if you see Google hasn't verified this up. Click Advanced, and then go to Marketing Master IO, and then click Continue. And after that, our account is now connected. Yeah, I guess this is good. So we have already verified, configured all of the credentials. We can now go back to our workflow. And then let's test this again. Let me execute the webhook and then send a test from our Google Chat, from our chatbot. Okay, so we have here data. We have here the data. So this is what we need, the data from our webhook URL. So after we have the data, as you can see here, the execution here is good. The execution here is good. The execution is good. And then here we went on, I think the if value here is not configured. That's why. So we need to configure this. So this is what we call the parameter, meaning we can get data from other nodes. Okay, we can get data from other nodes. So what we are doing here is we are going to check if the webhook URL or the webhook have the data that we need. What we need here is the name that we can put on the certificate. So let's click here, reset the value, and then let's add another expression here. So let's go to nodes and then go to webhook, because that is where we want to get the data. The data is the name. So click output data, then JSON, and on the body, we'd be able to see the name, which is here. Okay. So unfortunately, the name does not have a value here yet. So let's go back. What we need to do here is, because the certificate name is currently empty, let's try to add a value here. I mean the certificate variable is currently empty. That's why when we did the test, it failed because the name variable is empty. Let's add a pseudo value. So let's say temporary value. So I'm not gonna use a custom variable yet. I'm gonna use the exact value here. So let me test an automation again. Let me open the webhook URL and then execute the node. And then let's send a test request again. And it should give us the value. All right, so I think this is the good value, a correct value. Okay, so as you can see, the workflow has executed successfully. So once the workflow executed successfully, it means that all of this is working. So on the webhook data, we can see that the webhook received on the body, we received the temporary value, which is the name on the body. This is the body of our post request or the HTTP request. This is the data that we are going to pass along from Google Chatbot or from Facebook Chatbot, which is MMIO Chatbot, going to the N8N workflow automation. So once we receive the data, we are going to check if that data contains the name. So on the value here, you can see that the value 1 here, which is the name that we are going to check, contains the value. So since it has a value on the true socket here, we once there is a value, we are going to proceed to Google Slides. And on the Google Slides, we added the presentation ID. Again, the presentation ID can be taken from this URL on your Google Slides. Add the presentation ID over there, and here on the replace text, we are going to use again an expression. So where are we going to get the name? So the replace text is what it does is it will find the replace me text. Okay, this character, the replace me. It will try to find it on our Google Slide. And once it finds that text, it will replace it with this value. So this value is taken from our webhook, which receives data from our chatbot. So remember that on our chatbot, the name is we set to the temporary value. That's why we can configure it. Let me show you how this can be configured. Go to nodes, go to webhook, and then on the output data, go to JSON, go to body, and then click the name. And as you can see, there is the name variable here, and that is where we get the replace text. So meaning the this holder text or this variable will be replaced with the actual name value that the user has typed on the chatbot. So after that, after we set the Google Slides, what we can do next is we are going to get the thumbnail or the screenshot or the JPEG file of the slides. So what we used here is the Google Slides account, same authentication. So since we are using same Google Slides, it will share the same authentication. Just use the credentials that we configured earlier. And then on the source, use page. On the operation, we are going to use get thumbnail. And then same presentation ID. So on the presentation ID, so that we won't have to enter the presentation manually again, we can use expressions here. So click on the expressions, this one, click expressions, and then on the expression configuration, go to nodes, and then get the value on Google Slides. So on the parameters, we used the presentation ID on the parameters here. Okay. We can also get that presentation ID on the output data, which is this one, the presentation ID. So what would happen is we won't have to manually enter the presentation ID. So if we change the presentation ID on our very first Google Slide here, it will automatically change the presentation ID on our second Google Slide. And then on the object ID, we are going to use the first of the P character, because this is the slide ID. Okay, so you'd be able to see the slide ID over here. So edit slide equals ID.P. So ID.P. So the ID is letter P. So that is why we put P here as our object ID. Now, after we added the we need to execute this node first. After we execute the node, we will get the content URL. So this is the URL that contains the image that can be downloaded. But the problem is, we want this URL, or we want the file to be uploaded on our Google Drive. So what we can do here is we are going to download the image from here, from this content URL. We are going to download this, okay? So as you can see, this is just replace me for now because we haven't set the automation completely. So we are going to download this. So in order to download this into an image, we are going to use HTTP request. So on the HTTP request, you can click, if you want to add an HTTP request, click on the add button here, search for HTTP, you'd be able to see the HTTP request here. So double click on the HTTP request, we are going to use the get method. And on the URL, we don't have to manually enter the URL here. What we can do is use expressions. We need to get the URL or the content URL that we got from the output here. Okay, this is the content URL that we need on our next node. So this is the HTTP request. So go to expressions, and on the expression configuration, go to nodes and search the Google Slides that handles. I think this is the Google slide that handles the thumbnail. So go to output data and then JSON. And as you can see, this is the content URL. This is actually what we need. So click here, and after that, we would get the content URL for this. So now on the response format, we are going to use file, meaning we want to download this into its binary format. So once it's on the binary format, we can now use Google Drive to upload this one, because on Google Drive, we need a binary format to upload a file. So let's configure our Google Drive so that we can upload the binary format. So here we are going to configure the Google Drive account. We have already done this earlier, how to add credentials for Google Drive. And after that, on the source, we are going to use file because we want to upload a file. On the operation, use upload, and then enable the binary data. So once you enable the binary data, what it would do is it would get the binary data from the previous node. Okay, the previous node is the download file node or the HTTP request. This is the previous. So the output of the file, the output of this node is a binary data. So that's why Google Drive can now receive a binary data. So now on the file name, we need to continually change the file name so that we can save multiple images on our Google Drive using different file names. So on the file name, I used expressions here so that we can dynamically enter a file name. So I simply used the name of the user, okay? The name that the user has typed on the chatbot. We are going to append that on our certificate. So this is our certificate name. So the name of the user, which is temporary value, and then for dash certificate.jpg. So that's the name of our file. And after that, we can execute this node, and that will be uploaded on our Google Drive. So once that file is uploaded, we will get the file ID. Okay, so this is the file ID. So the thing here is, even though it is uploaded on our Google Drive, but it is not yet shareable. So the user will not be able to download this because since it is on our Google Drive, it is actually by default private. Okay, so if they attempt to download that, they will fail. What we can do is we are going to add another Google Drive. But before that, let's have another Google slide here. So the Google slide here restores our Google slide into its previous state. What we mean here is, if you remember on our first Google slide here, we replaced the text. We replaced this. Okay, this is replaced with the actual name of our subscriber. So if we don't replace it back to this variable, what would happen is if another user gets the certificate, Google Slide will not be able to find this variable text anymore because it will be replaced with example John Doe. It will become John Doe. So there's no variable here to replace. That's why it would fail. What would happen is if another user requests for a certificate, they will receive John Doe or the name of the previous user. That's why we need to bring it back to the previous value, which is the variable, the replace me variable. So that's what we did here. we simply restored the Google slide to its original form. So the page ID here is, I'm gonna use just use P, because that's the page ID of our Google Sheet. Now let's get back here. So this is our Google slide. What we did here is, yeah, we are going to use the same presentation ID. So the presentation ID, we did not input the presentation ID manually. What we did is we used expressions to get the value from the previous Google Slides. So go to Google Slide node, output data, JSON, and you can get the presentation ID here. So it is actually dynamic, okay? Now, we are going to reverse, okay? So the previous name is temporary value. What would happen now is the Google slide will find the name or the temporary value, the name that the user has inputted, and once it finds that text, it will replace it with its original value, which is the this variable, the replace me variable, so that the next user can reuse the same Google slide again. So after we restored this Google slide to its previous state, what we need here, what we need to do next here is we are going to share or make this file ID shareable or downloadable by that user. So we are going to use another Google Drive credential here, and the resource we are going to use file, and then on the action we are going to click share, and then on the file ID we are going to simply use the file ID that was generated by the Google Drive, the previous Google Drive. So select Google Drive on the nodes, on the output data, you'd be able to see on the JSON there is an ID there. So use that, click here, and the ID will be used for our Google Drive. So we are now going to use the file ID that was generated by our previous. Now on the permissions, we are going to set the role to be reader, and then type is anyone, meaning anyone on the internet can download this. So the user can download the certificate right away. After that, after we have changed the permissions, we can now, what we need to do now is we are going to generate the file ID. I mean the download URL. So to do that, we are going to use functions. So add here, search for functions. And on the function, this is actually JavaScript. So what I did here is, this is the file URL or the Google Drive file URL. So how did I get this? How did I arrive at the Google Drive file URL? So it's actually easy. If you have a Google Drive file, what you can do is you can preview any file on Google Drive, and then simply go to another window. So open in another window, and once you open that on another window, it should be an image. Let's select an image here, any image. So let's use a file here or any other image. So example, this is our image. What we can do now here is, let's go to the image. Example, this is our image. Right click. No, let's just use another image. Okay, I'm gonna find another image. What I'm trying to do here is I'm gonna show you the format of the file URL. Okay, I think this is the one. We can now click preview, and on the preview we can click open in another window or open in a new window. And if you do that, you would be able to see the file URL here, or the file sharing URL. So copy this, copy the file URL, and then go back to our automation, and we can add this here. So it needs a little bit of JavaScript. And then we added the file ID, okay? The Google Drive file ID that was previously generated by the Google Drive node, okay? So that is the file ID that we intend to share to the user. So if you remember, that's also the file ID that was where we changed the permission so that the user can download this. Now, this is the function. This is our last, what we call the last node. This is actually the output that we need. If we execute this, we would be able to see that the output now contains the URL, contains now the URL view. So this URL view is what we need to get back to the user. So now if we go back, let's go back to webhooks, because we need to configure the webhook back to its original, this is a very important configuration. When are we going to respond? Previously, I set the response to immediately because I want to get the response ASAP. But if we want to deploy this setup, we actually need to respond when the last node finishes, because the output of our last node, that is the data that we need to get back to our chatbot. That is the data that we need. The data that we need is the download URL. So if that's why on the respond type, we are going to use when the last node finishes. And as you can remember, our last node is the function. And the function output is this one. It would output the URL. This is the download URL that we need. Now, on the chatbot, you'd be able to see here that the workflow is not currently getting the certificate URL. So because we haven't set it up yet. Since we have already configured all of the credentials and all the configurations of our workflow, we can now use the download webhook. We can now execute this again using the test URL. So click execute node, and let's go back to our HTTP request. Let's use the the test webhook URL, and then click test request. And after doing the test request, as you can see, it's taking longer now, because what would happen is our workflow would actually execute all of the nodes until it reach the end of our node. So just like this one, it executed all of the node, and once it reached the last node or the function node, it will get the output of our function. So if we go to the map response on our HTTP request, we would be able to see here that the data that we need, we actually now have the data that we need. Okay, let me run that again. Let me execute the workflow again, because I accidentally closed the HTTP request. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so I think this is the webhook URL that we need. Let's copy the webhook URL again. Let's go back to our chatbot and then send a test request. Okay, now we have the response. Okay, let me check the error. Oh, the error is because the certificate, again, once I closed this, I did not save it before, but the certificate name is currently blank. The certificate name custom variable. So let's just add another temporary value. Now let's so since that's a temporary value, we can execute this node again and run a test request, and then let's see. It will run all of the nodes until we reach the end of the node. And as you can see now, the execution is complete, and we can now map the response. So on the response, we can see that the job URL or the download URL is ready. We are now going to save this URL on the custom variable which I previously created, the certificate URL. So save the custom variable on your certificate URL, and then we are going to output another message here. Congrats, we have successfully created your certificate, and this is the custom variable where we saved the URL that was generated by our workflow automation. Let's save this. So since our workflow is now complete, it is now working properly, we can now set this to live. We can activate this workflow. So don't forget to activate your workflow. We need to use the production URL because the test URL only works once, but the production URL will keep working. Will be the webhook that would actually work. Yeah, let's go back to our HTTP request and then replace the request URL with the production URL. And on the body, instead of this another value, we can now use the custom variable here, which is the certificate name. We can now add the certificate name here because we have already configured everything correctly. So we can now save this. Okay, very good. We are now on the production. So since we are now production ready, this is actually working. We can now activate this. We can now activate this. The path node is already taken. Okay, we can change the path of the node. New path. Okay, so that's the path of our node. This is the production URL. We can now go back to our HTTP request and update our production URL. Confirm the changes. And then we can save. And after saving, we can activate. Okay. Our automation is now active. It is now live. Let's try it out. Let's send a test request. Oh, let's save our automation first. Let's save and send a test request. So we can monitor the executions. Let me show you where we can monitor the executions later. Let me just test this out. Okay, so yes, please. I want to generate a certificate, and after that, No, let's add another name. Jan Von Do. Okay, so example, this is our name. And after that, it will generate the request. Let's click yes, proceed first. And then it will call the HTTP request. Okay, we are now creating the certificate for you. And it should generate the certificate for us. Okay, great. It's working. So we now have the certificate here. If we click that, it would take us to the download URL from our Google Drive. And as you can see, this is Jan Von Do. This is correct. And to monitor all of the executions, you can go to the executions tab and you would be able to see this one. So this is the recently executed webhook. So it is a success. So we can open that up so that we can see the data that was generated as the workflow is executing each of our node. So as you can see, the name is Jan Von Do. And on the output node, we can see here that this is the drive URL. So, yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty much it. A little complicated, but this is advanced use case. It just proves that with using a workflow automation, you can empower your bot to do absolutely anything, or not really anything, but to expand the capability of your chatbot using the HTTP request and a workflow automation. So there's a lot of applications here. If we go to the slides, instead of a certificate, we can transform this into an invoice. So we can automatically generate an invoice. We can also use a ticket, plain tickets or ticket for your event. automatically generate ticket for your event on your chatbot, and more. So there's a lot of use cases here. So for the replace me, you can add as many text here as possible. You can add as many. So example, you can add another text variable here. Let me copy this and paste. Example, on the text variable, you can add it here. Replace me underscore also. So you can have multiple texts that the automation would replace with the actual value. So yeah, I hope you learned a lot on this video. And if you think that having the n8n.io or the MMIO Connect automation is useful for you, then yeah, please leave us a little review. Hopefully a positive review on our Trustpilot account. So yeah, that's it, fam. So I'm gonna add more demo on the next few days to show you how this can work out for your business. So if you have any more ideas what demo I should do next, simply comment down below and I will be happy to create that demo for you if it's possible. Okay, so see you on our next